Welcome to Living on Purpose Mini-Pod. I'm Mark Pumphrey along with my co-host, Dr. Kristie Stewart. And you know what, Kristie? We're going to talk a little bit about why people are so sad. I mean, if you're sad, this would be the show for you because we're going to explain why you're going to...
Well, especially Americans, that's what we're going to talk about.
That's right. So, especially like you said in America, but boy, I tell you what, those Scandinavian countries, I noticed that those are one of the happiest in the world, right?
They are some of the happiest in the world. In fact, if you include Iceland and Amsterdam as part of Scandinavia, then they represent 6 of the top 10. And those 6 have been in the top 10 since they started actually keeping statistics of the happiest places on the planet.
Now, what is that? How do they keep the statistics?
Well, every year, the United Nations measures the quality of life for citizens around the world. And they give the top 10. And again, the Scandinavian countries have dominated the top 10 since they started record keeping. But they look at areas of good governance, a strong sense of community, respect for fellow citizens, and generally a high quality of life. Well, you can see why the U.S. hasn't made the top 10.
Well, yeah, and I got to tell you, it's kind of interesting that of the top 10...
Of the top 10, six Scandinavian countries have represented the top 10 since they've been keeping data. There's 6 other countries that kind of go in and out of those other 4 spots.
But it surprises me that the big ones are cold. I would think that...
Well, let's just look at the top 10, right?
Okay.
Of the top 10, number 10 is Sweden. Number 9 is Australia.
A little bit warmer.
A little bit warmer. Sticking with there, New Zealand. Number 7 is the Netherlands. Number 6 is Canada. Number 5 is Finland. Number 4 is Norway. Number 3 is Iceland. Number 2 is Switzerland. And number 1 is Denmark. And again, it switches back and forth every year between who's going to be number 1. Is it going to be Denmark or is it going to be Norway?
Now, what are some of the reasons why Denmark is number 1?
They have an abundance of public spaces and public services. You know, they have free health care, education is free. They have a very strong sense of family and community, which really bumps it up to number 1.
So with it having a lot of public spaces, public education, things of that nature, really brings them into the most happiest. I bet you if there's a happy list, much like Santa, there's probably an unhappy list.
Yes, there is an unhappy list. And in the top 10 most unhappy countries in the world, they're all African, excluding Cambodia, with West Africa topping at the number 1 most unhappy place to live.
Well, it's got to have something to do with, not enough food, environment. Clean water is a huge one, I bet.
Oh, could you imagine if you're sitting in a house or a refugee tent, at night and you can't sleep because of fear that a bomb's going to drop on you?
Right.
I mean, I don't know how you can be happy. If you don't have your basic needs met of safety, security, food, water, shelter, I think it would be very difficult to be happy.
And see, this is what, now that we're going to jump back over the pond, back to the U.S., we're one of the richest countries in the world, yet we didn't even hit the top 10. I mean, could it be that we're just not grateful enough? It has something to do with sadness, depression? I mean, what do you think is some of the reasons why?
Well, there's been a lot of research on this. The first one being the biggest, being the Harris poll. Basically what they found is that only 33% of Americans said that they were happy. Men reported being happier levels than women. It was interesting that the South was happier than the North. I don't know what the geographical line for that is. People over the age of 65.
Warmer.
There you go. People over the age of 65 were happier than younger people. People who are registered to vote are happier than those who are not registered to vote, even though we're unhappy with those people that
right.
didn't vote. But there's a lot of reasons, and in the full podcast we go through all of them. But
that's right.
There's a lot of reasons why the Harris poll found that the U.S. People that were surveyed are very unhappy.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with, it's interesting when you pull this research, how much of it had to do with careers, and again, like with the voting and everything like that. So I find that fascinating.
Well, risk was another that Allison Scranger did some research. She concluded that most rich Western countries that emotionally, from a happy perspective, we're worse off today than our parents' generation, right? We live longer, we have more leisure time, we have more technology and globalization, we can buy far more for less, yet we report higher levels of anxiety and depression. And they found that expectations cause a lot of our unhappiness, that it's not enough that to just have more than, say, our parents, but we need to believe that keeping what we have is sustainable in the future. So it's interesting from her research that found that people in the U.S. are unhappy not because of what they have or don't have, but of what they're afraid to lose tomorrow. So you're not happy with today with what you have because you're afraid you're going to lose it tomorrow.
That is really
That was the number one
yeah.
reason for Americans' unhappiness was risk.
I got to tell you, well, I mean, it's true, though. I mean, if you sit there and think about it, if you're way into debt and everything like that, I could see where that could really play with your psyche about that.
Right. Debt is expensive. Debt is stressful. Number one reason for divorce in this country because of finances and debt. Money in general. Yes, we're a capitalist society. We grow up and we're told we need to go to college and get a good job and make a lot of money. But people in the, again, we have more than our parents' generation. But we're less happy than before the Great Depression, which is
I find that fascinating, even because you're sitting over here. Well, I think it's probably because everybody has an $800 phone. And,
there you go, or more than one $800 phone. Yeah.
And you're so sucked into that $800 phone, or more than one phone, I guess. But
research indicates that anything over $75,000 in income, that it doesn't produce any more happiness. So that's kind of an interesting.
That is kind of an interesting that they got it down to a number.
Yeah, that you have more happiness as far as the position that you have in life, but it doesn't bring any more happiness as far as what you can buy. You kind of saturate yourself at $75,000. Now, I guess that would really depend on geographical location. Again, right. $75,000 in Indianapolis is a lot more money than $75,000, say, in Manhattan.
Yeah, that's true. I would imagine it has something to do with wherever you live. But it is interesting that most people, at least in my mind, I'm sitting over here thinking, $75,000 doesn't seem like that much money. And I'm sure a lot of people, and it's not because I make $75,000, it's just because in your mind you think that that's not that much money. But in turn, it's the point of where you don't think that money's a problem.
Right. Well, it's interesting that people that make more money, say that figure or higher, that they handle life's problems like divorce and different things like that better, but they didn't gain any more satisfaction as far as being happy, where people that were made under that or people that were considered poor, they actually were able to have a happier life and have higher life satisfaction than people who had a lot of money. Interesting. And it's funny because, New York City is the most unhappy city in the U.S. Lafayette, Louisiana is the happiest. So it's interesting, but because people who they surveyed, that either people who just moved into New York City or people that lived there their whole life, that it didn't matter, that they were all the highest rate of unhappiness. But it's funny because Brooklyn is the fastest growing city to live in the U.S. and it's the most unhappy. So go figure. Right?
I really want to move so I can be unhappy.
Yeah. Well, and that 1 out of 10 Americans suffer from depression. 40 million Americans over the age of 18 have some type of anxiety disorder. Suicide is the third largest cause for death in young youth. And if you can imagine, we have children as young as 5 years old committing suicide in this country. Think about that, people. 5 years old. We have 5-year-olds killing themselves, hanging themselves primarily, because life is too hard for them at 5.
Well, yeah, I got to tell you, committing suicide is I don't even know where to even begin with that. But one of the reasons why we are so depressed, I guess, is one of the things that you found was social media.
Yes, Facebook specifically, but it included all of social media. And, in the past, if our neighbor got a new car, we were jealous, right? Or we might have been happy for them. But now we can see what everybody's getting, what everybody has. And we judge our blooper reels, right? Our life and what we feel is not enough with everything that we see on Facebook, that all these people have everything and they're going on vacation and they've got this beautiful, happy wife and they've got all this stuff that they're only, in fact, on Instagram, you can even make your picture better before you even post it.
Oh, I would.
Right? So, I think that social media has really made things very difficult because we can see what we don't have and we can see what other people do have. And University of Michigan study was kind of interesting, that they found that the more time that you spend on Facebook, the worse that you feel. But the interesting thing was that if you felt bad, if you were depressed, you didn't go onto Facebook. But most people didn't realize that they actually felt worse when they got off of Facebook. So I found that kind of interesting.
That is kind of interesting. I find it interesting that you would go on Facebook and then leave depressed.
Yeah, well, that was a very large study, and found that most people, when they check off of Facebook, they're in worse state of unhappiness, or they're in a worse state of happiness than when they got on. But the University of Missouri found that surveillance without interaction was one of the leading causes for depression.
And creepy.
So if you're a person who goes onto Facebook and looks at everything and pays attention to everything, but never comments and never likes anything, that is not a very healthy place for you to be. If you can interact with people on Facebook, you have a more likely chance of it not being a bad thing for you. But if you're one of those kind of cyber stalkers that pay attention to everything but never comment, those people are considered surveillance without interaction. And that is a real problem in this country right now.
Well, and I got to say, I thought that when you were talking about this in the podcast, I thought, I wonder if I'm like that, because I never comment on anything on Facebook, but I don't think I really pay attention. Like, I'll scroll and I may read a few things, but when you said, really pay attention and really get involved, I don't really actually do that. So I'm not a cyber stalker.
Well, and it's interesting too, the people who only post but never look at anybody else's post. That's something.
Oh,
too,
yeah, I bet you that would.
But
that's self-centered. That's narcissistic. That's a whole different show.
But I'll have to say, in the full podcast, we also talk about the research that revolves around people that were way over-medicated, legally and illegally in this country, how technology is affecting our happiness level or unhappiness level, whether that be our phones or iPads. All of those different things. We talk about the minimalist movement, right? Of getting rid of
huge one.
Yeah, that people focusing on getting smaller houses and getting rid of a lot of their stuff. We talk about some of the ideas of self-care, right? How can you do a little bit better at this, right? How can you focus on being happier? And we give some concepts and baby steps on how you can move through and be happier in this country.
Well, some of the things that you talk about is like getting out in nature. For me, love camping. Can't get enough of it. I mean, even though it's a little 17-foot camper, it takes you away from it all, Right. And I just think that if you can get in those special places, you definitely will have a much better chance of not being depressed, right?
There you go.
Well, if you want to listen to the complete podcast, go to Indie Air Radio or click the link below and go to our Living on Purpose page. That way you can listen to the whole podcast. You can listen to our full podcast every Wednesday at 10 a.m. or 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Indie Air Radio. And don't forget to live every day of your life
on purpose.
On purpose.